All right. So MediaWiki deployments, and this is really just a chance for me to talk about, you know, a little hobby project that I've been working on for the past year, and also as a person who is a Linux, hardcore Linux user, I just can't stand using other people's tools to get to do things that I know how to do at the command line. However, I need to automate things because otherwise I just end up doing the wrong thing over and over again. Um, so anyway, that's what this is about. People hire me to set up their wikis, so I've been trying and maintain their wikis. I should probably outsource the maintenance, the long-term maintenance, to Ike because he seems to do a good job of that. Uh, but yeah, so I want to talk about setting up these wikis, and why. First of all, I suffer from not invented here. The not invented here um syndrome, which is why I can't use Mesa because Mesa is wonderful as Darren and people over there at NASA are. I just can't stand to use a tool that I have not written and does not work exactly the way I want it to work. And I think I already know how to do all the things that Mesa already does. So I don't want to learn a new tool to do something that I already know how to do. Um, yeah, so just let me build what I know, build on what I know. Also, Mesa has a big YAML file for configuration. And I'm not just hating on Mesa, so I'm hating on everyone who's not me. It's not just Mesa. But I want to use this 12-factor app uh, configurate, which I want to use their methodology, which puts the configuration in the environment. And even MediaWiki has this local settings file that has a bunch of PHP code in it that you have to fiddle with every time, and it's annoying. And I just want to stick my changes in a local settings file in an environment file and let it go. So and to use the 12-factor app sort of process, I use direnv, which is I guess I can put a link to that somewhere, but I basically that uses an envrc file to load up your all your particular configuration things so that you can change your wiki uh, from production to development really easily just by changing one file, and it's just a few settings in that envrc file. And then there's a conf directory that I want to use, which has different things in it. We'll go over in a second, and then just a regular MediaWiki. I just want to have the MediaWiki Git checkout instead of. I want to make sure that it's a pristine checkout and that I can just replace it anytime or upgrade it easily. Well, relatively easily. So here's what's in my conf directory. It has a couple of custom files where I have ns.json and groups.json, which I use to manage my namespaces and my groups, uh, permissions and stuff like that. And then I have the composer lock files in there. I have a standard local settings.php, which basically pulls in a bunch of stuff from the environment and then calls out to the extension files that these sub files in the local extensions.php to set up those. In MediaWiki, I just have the regular get checkout with submodules for different extensions. And so this is all great. This is a setup I want. How do I do this? So we have a make file, and I can't show you the whole make file because it's big, but I will walk you through a portion of the make file, just the portion that does the that updates, downloads Composer, verifies the integrity of it, and then yeah, that's what it does. So you can see here, I just have one single target. I can type make Composer, and it goes and gets the Composer. I have some other things up here, the URL for the signature, where we can verify it, and then the installer that we download. Let's see. Let me take a highlight off. So then it downloads two files here. It gets the signature, which is, it puts in the expected target and installer, and I have two rules and just puts it there and downloads those two things. And then it creates the composer-setup.php. After it has the installer and expected file, it verifies the sh SHA checksum on the installer, and then removes that file and moves installer file that it downloaded over to Composer Setup. So that's great. Now we go to the next step. Next step produces the Composer FAR file from Composer Setup file, which we created just here, and just runs these commands. I have a couple of other commands set up here because on some places I need to override the, I have to install a custom certificate and make it, get it to work with all the security checks that Composer does. And again, I have automated all of this because otherwise I would have to do this over and over again by hand and have to remember all the different commands and how they're set up, and it just but now I can just type make Composer and it does all of this, automatically downloads it. Actually, I don't even type make Composer. That's a dependent target for MediaWiki itself, where it downloads and verifies Composer before it goes and does the rest of the stuff that it has to do, which is run these targets to run Composer install or Composer update. So you can see there that they both these rules depend upon Composer. So if you want to run Composer update on your MediaWiki installation, you would just go type make Composer update, and it would download Composer if it needed to, and then run Composer update. And now the wonderful thing to me, the wonderful thing about all this is this is just simply shell code in a make file. And I can understand this really easily. I already know how to do all this stuff. I'm just automating these things that I already know how to do. And a make file allows you to break it up into separate targets, so you can easily understand this. You say, oh, what's this target here? This is Composer install. It must run Composer install, and it does. Oh, it depends upon Composer. What does Composer target do? The Composer target is back here. It runs make Composer FAR and then renames Composer FAR to Composer. What does Composer FAR do? That's way right there. Composer far. It runs, it creates composer setup and then runs composer setup, which you can't see it here, but it creates composer far. Running composer setup creates composer far. And then you can see how this works because I've adopted this mindset of writing code, which this is code. I've adopted this mindset of writing code that, you know, you should have a screen full of code should be complete, and you should be able to understand what's going on in a single screen full of code. In other words, these are like functions. The composer setup is like a function that everything is right there. And if it calls other things, that's fine. That's an abstraction. You don't depend upon that. But anyway, I write it this way instead of just putting all these statements in a line. I just write it this way because otherwise it's easier to understand. Oh, I'm creating the expected file here, and instead of just looking at a list of commands and saying, what do all these do? I get really irritated looking at parts of the MediaWiki source code because there are huge blocks of just PHP running on, and you're like, wait, what is it doing down here at the bottom that, and it's depending upon something that's 3 screens up, and you lose track. Anyway, so I get irritated with all that. So anyway, this is something I can understand and I can use. Let's see. I think, I'm sorry, I'm watching out the window that my fiber is being installed. So I'm being distracted here. I think that is pretty much what I have to say. And I would love to have people's questions. I would love to have people adopt my way of thinking because I think the right way. And yeah, so how can I encourage you to do that?
All right, thank you, Mark. Do we have questions, comments, contributions? See any hands raised yet? I'll wait a minute.
So yeah, it's okay if no one has any questions. We can move on to
Oh, we have a question from Brian though.
Oh darn.
You won't get off that easy, Brian.
Well, just a quick question. If you want us to comment on it or adopt it, are you making it available for us?
Yeah, I will put the URL. I have it on my personal Fabricator Git repository, which is public, but just because I like to host my own projects instead of depending upon GitHub forever and everything. Yeah, I will put the URL up.
So I guess I have a question. Leaving aside the question of that you like to do things your own way. You said one of the reasons is not invented here. So we'll just take that as a given and take that one off the table. How would you contrast what you're doing in Makefiles to something like the setup in Meza with YAML files, and when the scope of your Makefiles will install MediaWiki, it will install the dependency of Composer, but what about the other stuff that something like Meza does with setting up load balancing and the like?
Well, all of that can be done. Now, what's the difference here is that Meza, you're controlling it all in a YAML file. I'm trying to put all the control in the environment file, and having and for instance, I provide a list of extensions, and then I provide a target for each extension. First of all, there's a generic target, just, you know, is this extension from Wikimedia? Does it have an extension .json? And if those two things are met, then usually, you know, you can use a generic target, and you don't have to do anything else. But there are some other extensions, for example, Semantic MediaWiki, that I write a little bit of code, a few lines of code, and then I say, okay, any wiki that needs Semantic MediaWiki can use this, you know, this target to install Semantic MediaWiki, because I'm using a standard file structure here, and I have a standard way to signal that database the update.php needs to be run. And so the difference between this and Mesa is, first of all, you don't have to learn Ansible. You do have to know a little bit more shell scripting. If you know how to do something with shell scripting, then you can do it right away. You don't have to look up, you know, well, what do I do to get this done in Ansible? And so the Stack Overflow resource is a lot. I find there's a lot more for shell scripts and make files than there is for Ansible. And, you know, that's just me personally. And it's also my preference to use shell scripts. But yeah, does that answer your question?
It does. Do you have an example of one of those environment files that you could share?
Yeah, I do. Let me find one real quick. Anybody else have anything to say while I'm looking for my environment file?
Darren.
Yeah,
Yes.
so James would be the much better person to answer or, you know, probe at this and kind of ask about differences, because my involvement with Mesa development was heavy up until the point when he switched it to Ansible, and then I've been much less involved, so I'm not very smart or experienced in Ansible. But I think a couple of the drivers for why he changed it to that way of using Ansible and YAML files was, one, I don't know if I pronounced this right, the idempotence, making sure that, you know, you don't have to run a script over and over if it's already been done and doesn't need to be done again. And then the other benefit that I can think offhand is the ability for us to put those YAML files in a firewall GitLab repository, where we can have configuration management and continuous integration and auto deployment. So I'm curious if the way that you're going about this has those same type of features.
So the idem, I'm gonna mispronounce the word. You used the right word, but it was I'm not. Cindy, do you know how to pronounce that word?
Idempotence.
Idempotent. Thank you.
Yes.
Idempotent. Okay, so the idempotency of make files is, first of all, I put tests in the files, in the make files, where they can, if they're not building a file, which make file is set up to make files. So if a file exists, the rule does not need to be run to create that file. You can create stubs for other rules that don't necessarily create files, and say, okay, well, I've already run that, and you can touch a file and that'll tell the make file to do that. That takes care of some of the idempotency. There's also, for a target, you know, okay, well, this is what, if it's not creating a file, then you know this is what the result is supposed to look like. So you can test for that result and then not run the makefile, not run the target if that is in there. What was the other thing you said? Something about idempotency. Oh, putting everything in Git. Yes, all these files, everything is in Git. You can run it all from Git, and you can manage the version and configuration from there. So yeah, I think both of those, I agree that both of those are good reasons to use Ansible if that's what you're going to use. But I think both of those are also addressed with the makefile approach. One criticism that I've heard from people about makefiles is they're not readable. You can create unreadable code with whatever language you want. You can also create readable code even with makefiles. So that, you know, that's a, first of all, it takes a little bit of effort to learn any new language, and then secondly, it takes discipline to write readable code, no matter what you're doing. So anyway, there's nothing inherently in a makefile that makes it unreadable. I have on the screen one of those environment files where you can see, and this is actually partly stuff that I was using for the Internet Court of Lies. You can see, you know, I just have basic. This is a really simple thing I have here. I don't have a full version that I can show you of any particular wiki right now. I was working on setting that up, but I ran out of time. So this will have to do for now. Can you see what's on the screen there, Cindy? Can you read it? Do I need to make it bigger?
Yes, I can. I can read it.
All right.
Beautiful. All right.